Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Everyone is touched by psychiatric conditions, either themselves or a loved one. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Today on Healthy Minds.
Once you are in the criminal justice system, you have to remember it is the criminal justice system. It is not a therapeutic environment. That's not what it is designed for. And many parents assume that because it's a child, there's going to be something different done. The reality is the juvenile justice system operates as a system. Some studies have suggested upwards of 75% of the kids who go into the system have an undiagnosed mental health problem. So that's a fair number of kids who need something other than detaining.
That's today on Healthy Minds. This program is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the John and Polly Sparks Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Today I speak with leading psychiatrist, Dr. Arthur Stewart, who's the founding director of the Center for Health for Justice-Involved Youth. Arthur, thank you for joining us today. I want to start off asking you about the center that you've developed, and it's the Center for Health in Justice-Involved Youth. Tell me what brought you to begin and to lead that center.
The Center for Health and Justice-Involved Youth is really the brainchild of three people in Memphis, Tennessee. The juvenile court judge, then State Senator Mark Norris, and the dean at the College of Medicine. We had a tremendous problem in our juvenile justice system. Our court was under monitoring by the federal government. There were allegations of abuse and of the kids who were being kept in detention and were being handled in the system. And the three of them got together and said, as a university that wants to be outward facing, we'd like to provide something to help bring health and mental health into the equation when you're talking about kids involved in the justice system. And so they came up with the notion that if they created a center of excellence looking at health and not the justice and legal aspects, that we could address unmet mental health need, we could look at the impact of trauma on children who are placed outside of their home in child welfare or juvenile justice, or who are in paths of school discipline that lead them into those systems. And they created this center and then recruited me to come and develop and design the program.
I want to ask you about trauma-informed care. We hear that term, and people aren't sure what exactly does that mean.
Trauma-informed care is a concept that we now understand much better thanks to some work that has been done over the last couple of decades. We realize now that when things happen, bad things happen to children, it impacts them psychologically, physically, emotionally. Tennessee is one of the states in the country that has taken up the adverse childhood experiences work that was begun way back in the late 70s, where they looked at adults who had had terrible things happen to them as children, abuse, neglect, coming up in what they call dysfunctional homes, and looked at a pattern of chronic medical problems that evolved that directly related to those experiences as a child. Tennessee is one of the states that has decided to use the science that has been collected over these last few decades and really craft models of intervention, both to prevent children from having these experiences and for those children who've had them to look for ways to intervene and provide more stable opportunities for them to get services, for their neighborhoods to be safer, for their families to understand more about what it means, and most importantly for schools, which is the work of the child, for schools to really appreciate what goes on in the life of a child who is truant or who's a disciplinary problem that we aren't aware of that is impacting them and causing the behaviors that ultimately wind up with them going into a system. So the trauma-informed care part of this is recognizing that when these things happen, there are now evidence-based interventions that we can use to either reverse those things or mitigate the symptoms so that the child has an opportunity to function, to grow developmentally in an appropriate way, and perhaps even to thrive in spite of everything that has happened to them.
So when a teacher or someone else sees behaviors that are of concern, one of the things they need to ask themselves, and one of the things that we as professionals need to ask, is what might have happened to bring that about, and then do some interventions along those lines.
That's exactly correct. In fact, in the language of trauma, you have expressed exactly how we begin the training. When we start with what's wrong with you, which has been the tradition, it alienates the child, it makes them feel under more pressure, it doesn't allow them to share with us what's going on. We encourage people in our training to stop saying what's wrong with you and begin asking what's happened to you. These trauma...
Very big difference between those two sentences.
Everything from how you articulate it. When you say what's wrong with you, there is typically a behavior and a demeanor that goes with what's wrong with you. When you say what happened to you, your voice, your behavior, your body language, everything changes, and that's the beginning of the training. The retraining is not blaming the child for the behavior, looking at what caused the behavior in the child and addressing that.
And we know that a child, an adolescent, even a young adult's brain is still developing. So interventions that we take can really change the course of their life.
Exactly, exactly. In fact, in the training, we train law enforcement, police and sheriff, school resource officers. We train, as I said, community groups and others. The first thing we do in the training is begin to help people understand that if you have a child, and in the morning when your child gets up, you say, I need you to pick up your room, take out the trash, stop hitting your brother and sister, and teasing them mercilessly. If you can do that and only say it one time, raise your hand. No one in the room has ever raised their hand. And we go on and we ask a few other questions, trying to normalize that these are children. We work with people to stop calling them juveniles because that conjures up an image. The face on TV, juvenile rob someone, juvenile assault someone, gives you a picture of someone who is on the path to becoming criminal. When you say child, adolescent, youth, youthful offender, any number of ways to reconfigure that image, it begins to remind people that first and foremost, these are children. The adolescent brain is not fully developed until well into their 20s. We can argue about whether it's 23 or 26, but it is certainly not
still developing
15,
through the 20s.
17 when some of these acts occur. These are children who see a permanent solution to a temporary problem as the way to go. And you have to begin there with the adults who are working with them to help them rethink the paradigm. Is this someone who is definitely on the path to criminal behavior and there's nothing we can do? Or in the spirit of the juvenile justice system, should we be looking at ways to rehabilitate instead of punish?
What should a parent do who may be watching right now? They have a teenage child who's starting to act out behaviorally, doesn't listen to them, staying out late, maybe experimenting with drugs, maybe getting in with a crowd that's doing things that they shouldn't do. What do you tell that parent?
Well, a couple of things. We start with, have you had a talk with your child? Have you sat down with them and had the talk about, I'm worried, things seem to be changing, I'm not sure what's going on, are you comfortable talking with me about it? Because there's definitely something that you need to talk about. I don't know what happened. It's not, I don't know what's wrong with you. I don't know what has happened. Looking for others who might have a better chance of talking with them, whether that's a family friend. Sometimes talking to your parent about what's going on in your life is not easy, but as the aunt and godmother to many children, I know kids will talk to you as a godparent or the older sister of the parent in ways that they won't talk to that parent. And there's got to be someone in that child's life that you can put up as, well, would you talk to so-and-so? Would you talk to Aunt Sue or Uncle John or somebody? Depending on your access to their wider network, you can talk with someone at the school to see if they've also noticed this and what interventions might be available there. I'm from a part of the country where people go to the minister. First and foremost, you go to the minister and ask for help. If the child's active in church or religious activities, you talk to the people where they are more likely than not to have a relationship where they will talk. It could be sports, it could be after school activities, it may even be their circle of friends, because assuming that everybody in their circle is doing whatever is troubling you could be a big mistake. And when all else fails, we always encourage people not to be afraid to ask for professional help, to talk with a counselor, to take the child to their pediatrician and talk with them about what's going on. Keep trying to figure out what has happened is the way we approach it.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't take no for an answer, and keep on trying.
I see too many families where I hear we tried for so long to get some help and nobody would help us. Or we tried and people said it's just a phase and you'll have to get through it. And in those cases, we really struggle with how to help that parent not feel guilty when the child is now tried as an adult for a crime they committed in the midst of some behavioral problem they were having, or because they were running with the wrong crowd. And the parent is feeling very guilty that they should have done something. Our system, our mental health system, our school systems are not equipped to handle many of the challenges that our children today are facing. Everything from social media to peer pressure to gangs and all these other things that are going on. These are not the things that many parents understand or know how to deal with. And so it takes the village. That is a very accurate phrase. It takes a village, and parents have to be willing to ask for help and accept it when it is offered. And they have to not be afraid of the stigma that is still associated with getting help.
I want to ask you about that. How do you break down that stigma?
Education, education, education. I talk just about every day with someone who has some misconception about mental illness or about medication or about trauma and its impact on a child and family, or about the miracle of, giving them this thing or that thing and then they'll be okay. And it really is an educational information sharing, understanding the facts thing for me. That's the approach I take. I think the more information we can, good information, factual information, that we can give people about what's going on, about what we can do. Mental illnesses are real. Even in children when they occur, these are real medical problems.
Many of our mental illnesses first begin to show themselves in young people.
Exactly, that's the age, yeah. The number of children who are in the juvenile justice system, who are at the 16, 17, 18-year-old, who were not doing well in school, and someone said, well, we'll put them in Job Corps. And they go off and they do whatever you do in Job Corps and get that training. And something happens. They're isolated, they have a different social network that they're not comfortable with. Children going off to college and having first breaks in college. These are things that we don't talk about. These are things we could do something about in the preventive way. If more parents understood the isolation and the pressure that goes with entering college away from home, they would probably want to do more preparation to be aware of that. And since we are diagnosing better, treating better, and offering a variety of interventions so that children with mental illness now are getting into college, we have to do the next step, which is it doesn't end because they go away to college.
In fact, sometimes it's exacerbated
That's
when
right.
they go away.
And we have to have a plan. You know, you're going off to college and this is happening and you've had these challenges, so we need a doctor, a therapist, we need some support people, we need all of those things, and we need to understand what the college does in supporting children who have mental illness or mental health issues. We need to ask those questions, and again, not be embarrassed and have the stigma keep us from asking those questions.
Be as proactive for a psychiatric condition as one would be if there was a physical ailment.
Exactly. If you send your child off to school and you know that they've got a chronic juvenile diabetes, or they've had a challenge with, you know, some kind of arthritis or any medical problem.
They have a broken leg when they're going off to college.
Exactly. You set in motion a series of plans for them. Why would depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, why would that be any different when you're sending your child off to college? And a lot of this has to do with us not talking about these things because of the stigma, because of the shame, because we're guilty that maybe it's something that we did that set this in motion, because people still are a little fuzzy on what's mental illness and how did that happen in my family.
And did my involvement as a parent cause this?
Exactly. So we've got to work with the parents and the family to help them understand it's not your fault. But there is something you can do to help and be supportive. And we've got to work with the child so that they understand being in a new environment, having a new social network, having the stressors of, you know, we all remember what the first year of college was like, and it was not good for everybody. You know, you got to make new friends, you got to hang out in a different setting, you're away from your natural supportive community, depending on how important that was in your stability. That could be a deal breaker.
It's a stressful period of time for the youth.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, if a child does get involved in the criminal justice system, their behaviors get them arrested and they're now in the system, what should a parent do to be proactive to help their child?
Well, there are a couple of things, I think. The first and foremost is, once you are in the criminal justice system, you have to remember it is the criminal justice system. It is not a therapeutic environment. That's not what it is designed for. And many parents assume that because it's a child, there's going to be something different done. The reality is the juvenile justice system operates as a system. There are judges and lawyers and laws and regulations. Now, we hope in most places that they are enhanced by the kinds of services that most kids need. A significant number, some would say, some studies have suggested upwards of 75% of the kids who go into the system have an undiagnosed mental health problem. So that's a fair number of kids who need something other than detaining and confinement.
They need treatment.
They need treatment. Sometimes they'll get it and sometimes they don't. We rely on the systems, just as we do in the adult population, we rely on the systems to provide those things, and not every system is created equal. There's some model programs of early intervention for children who are in those systems. And there are some places that either because they don't have the resources or they're just not aware of the need. You did the crime, you must do the time is the mentality in a lot of places, and that includes in the juvenile justice systems. But I'm happy that more and more we are seeing those kinds of systems in the minority. Most people now acknowledge that adolescent development should be driving how we interact with kids who are unfortunately captured in this system. The federal government has been extremely innovative and creative in its approach to supporting those kinds of models that if we must have children confined, and we know the significant number of them and the problems they face, that there are things we should be doing on the front end, because we don't want them there for a long time. And when they leave, we want them on the path to recovery. We don't want them at the same place they were when they entered.
What should a parent do if there is one child who's acting out, with these difficult behaviors, but there's other kids in the house. How do they work with the other kids to minimize the negative effect on those other children?
Well, I think the most important thing that you do is work with the child that needs the help and show the other children that even though there's something going on, as your parent, and unfortunately with the population I work with, it's mostly moms, single moms, head of household moms, who often have 2 or 3 kids. And when they are close in age, and particularly boys, when they look up to the older brother, who's now the focus of everyone's attention, and want to be like him, mom has her hands full trying to remind them that what's going on with your older brother is not what you should be doing. It's not good, it's not healthy, it's not safe. It could get him into more trouble, and we don't want that for you. But it is a challenge when you have younger kids. Most of the time they look up to the older sibling who's, whatever the behavior is that's getting them all of this unwarranted attention, the others want to be like that, because as with, I don't want to say normal families, but as with any family, everybody wants attention. And kids look at, you're getting attention, maybe if I do that, I'll get attention. And in some families that I work with, the kids see the way to get attention is to do what they're doing.
And often it's natural for younger siblings to want to be like the older sibling.
To follow in the footsteps. I mean, there are terrible stories, family stories, that I've come across in the last 5 to 8 years, where 3 brothers, for example, at one time, were all in detention. And we were doing this asset mapping as part of a community organization that I was working with. And they were not in detention at the time, but they all came to this session. And their task was to draw the place where they felt happy and good about being with each other. And they drew the time when they were all 3 in juvenile detention, because they were together, they protected each other, they were 3 brothers. They had each other for support and love and relationship, and that was a happy time. Now, that is not the story we want to hear.
We don't want detention to be
the happy place for the family of siblings. We want there to be other options for them to find comfort with each other, to be supportive of each other, and to feel good being with each other. But there was no convincing them that maybe you could do this somewhere else, because when they were outside, they might be in a different gang. They had to do different things to separate themselves in the community, to show that they were as big and bad as the brother. And that was very sad, that this was their portrait of happy with each other was in a detention center.
What does a parent do to help get their child out of a gang lifestyle and being involved in that? Because that has to be extraordinarily difficult for the parent, especially a single mom.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good news is that most of the schools, most of the large urban public school districts, have some kind of gang intervention program that is modeled after a very effective model that's like going around the country for some time now. And it involves either former gang members who now are out of the gang life and have come back to actually work directly with youth who are at risk of being recruited into a gang or who are trying to get out of a gang. And they offer support and protection and guidance and mentoring for how to live outside of that life safely. And then there are programs in the community where community organizations, sometimes faith-based, but not always, are actively working in the community at the upstream to keep kids from being tempted to go into the life by offering them other options. After school groups, activities, field trips outside of the neighborhood so that they can see a bigger world than the 4-square block radius that they are mostly in between home and school and anything else they have to do. So you've got a combination of things that happen in the school because they recognize this is not helping kids go to school, learn while they're in school, and graduate from school. And then you've got those community groups that are actively involved. And in many of the cases, especially if these are boys growing up in homes without fathers, there are men in the community stepping up to be role models and mentors. There are programs going into barbershops where boys congregate as young men and listen to the wise older men about how to live and how to respect yourself and others and the kinds of things you should be aspiring to have a full, productive, thriving existence. So the community approach and the school approach are really the two ways that I've seen work most effectively.
Altha, I want to thank you so much for all that you do for our field, for patients, for families, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
If you have a child or other loved one who is acting out behaviorally and may have become involved in the criminal justice system as a result of those behaviors, don't sit quietly. Be proactive. Get your child or loved one the help that he or she needs. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. This program is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the John and Polly Sparks Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Remember, with help, there is hope. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein.